Hello, everyone, and welcome to this direct instruction for Unit 6, Calculating the Value of a Firm. I know you guys have a couple of things to do this evening or for the rest of the week, but I did just want to touch on a couple of quick subjects that I felt were, relevant to, the assignments you have due this week, your discussion sections, and also the quiz and final exam. So the focus of this direct instruction will be the learning objectives of identifying the differences between mergers, understanding the purpose of corporate alliances, and be able to explain what happens during a divestiture. So ultimately, a merger is a combination of two or more firms to form a single new firm. The main motivation of most mergers is to increase the value of the combined enterprise. And ultimately, there are four different types of mergers. First being the horizontal merger, which is basically the combining of two firms that produce the same types of goods and services. An example of this would be HP and Compaq, two computer companies that formed a horizontal merger a number of years ago. Typically, a horizontal merger decreases the competition within the marketplace. Another recent example of a horizontal merger or a potential horizontal merger would be with T-Mobile and Sprint, forming, a much large, two of the four smaller mobile telecommunication companies actually forming together to form a much larger company. The next would be an example of a vertical merger. This is a merger between a firm and either a supplier or a customer of that firm. A good example of this would be Pepsi's merger with different restaurant chains that they service. Another example of this would be with eBay and PayPal. If you have an eBay account, it's a very good chance you have a PayPal account. It's kind of how they go hand in hand. So these two companies merging together, although they're two completely separate companies, they merge vertically because one's a supplier, one's the customer, and so on and so forth. Next, you have the congeneric merger. This is a merger between firms within the same industry that currently don't have a relationship with one another. A good example of this would be an airline. Let's say, I'm sure you may have heard of Delta. I'm sure you've heard of JetBlue. Both of these companies have their own travel agencies that operate under them. So let's say Southwest decided, I want to have a piece of that pie. And as opposed to starting their own travel agency, they decided that they're going to purchase a travel agency. Doing this, they are still within the same industry, but they don't currently have a relationship. So that new Southwest travel company would be an example of a congeneric merger. And finally, you have the conglomerate merger, which is a merger between companies from two completely different industries. Good example of this would be with Amazon and Whole Foods. Another example of this would be the Walt Disney Company when they merged with ABC. Ultimately, with mergers, the government looks more closely at the horizontal mergers, mainly because, for the consumer's sake, basically. When you have a horizontal merger, typically this is an increase in concentration and reduced competition, which can ultimately be to the detriment of the consumer. Vertical mergers are typically ignored. Conglomerate and congeneric mergers are generally permitted as well. All right, next we're going to talk about corporate alliances. And a corporate alliance, companies may also enter into alliance where they agree to work collaboratively without actually combining their overall operations. A common alliance is a joint venture, such as you would see in the construction industry or a large complicated project, to combine the knowledge and spread the overall risk. Another good example of a corporate alliance would be with Starbucks and Barnes and Nobles. I'm pretty sure you've all seen one of those. Ultimately, just having that relationship where, you know, people like coffee, people like books. It's a good merger between the two. And ultimately, they've never combined their corporate, their corporate headquarters or operations, but overall, you know, they both feed off of each other in a mutualistic relationship. Next, we're going to discuss leverage buyouts, which refer to a takeover of a company that utilizes mainly debt to finance the buyout. Typically, the company performing the leverage buyout or takeover only has to provide a small amount of financing, yet is able to make a large purchase, hence the name, a leveraged buyout. The expectation of the leverage buyout is that the return generated on the acquisition will more than outweigh the interest paid in debt, hence making it a very good way to experience high returns while only taking a small amount of risk of capital. The most common way for debt to be raised is the target company's assets to be provided as collateral for the actual debt. The the private equity company will either sell off parts of the target company or use its future cash flows to pay off the debt and then ultimately exit, likely with a profit. Next, we're going to talk about divestitures. This is the partial or full disposal of a business unit through the sale, exchange, closure, or bankruptcy. There are pretty much 4 different types of divestitures. First being a spinoff. This is one of the more common ones you may have heard of, in which the stock of the subsidiary company is given to the parent company's stockholders. There's a couple different examples I have of that. One will be Baxter International, which is a healthcare company. They spun off their biopharmaceutical business, Baxalta Incorporated. Another pretty common example of this would be McDonald's Corporation, that a number of years ago spun off their stake in the company Chipotle, which I'm pretty sure you guys have all heard of. The next example of a divestiture is a carve-out, which follows the steps of the spinoff, but ultimately only sells off, some of the shares of the company. A good example of this would be Santander Bank and Santander Consumer USA. Santander Bank ultimately didn't want to work with the consumer business of financing vehicles, so they did spin off Santander Consumer USA, which is its own company on itself. Another example of this would be with GE. And when they carved out their financial branch, which ended up becoming Synchrony Financial. The next popular type of divestiture is just selling the operating unit to another firm. An example of this would be, let's say Google decided that they didn't want to have Android anymore, or they wanted to get rid of that particular operating unit. And now let's say Samsung comes and say, okay, we want to buy Android so that we have our own mobile platform, similar to how Apple has their own mobile platform in iOS. Ultimately, if Google decided to sell Android to Samsung, that would be an example of selling that one particular operating unit in a divestiture. And finally, the most simple of divestitures would have to do with the closure or bankruptcy, and that's basically just liquidating all the assets completely, which can happen a number of different ways, selling different parts of different companies, getting rid of the land. A good example of this would likely be with Target, pretty much liquidating everything that they had to do with once they had to move to Canada a number of years back. All right, so that's all I have for you guys this evening. Similar to last week, I do want to have a quick confirmation that you guys actually were either here or watched this video when I posted into the announcements. So after finishes watching this video, make sure you go to Unit 6, Discussion 1, and find my original post. There is a short video attached to that post called Mergers and Acquisitions. I want you guys to watch that. And next, I would like you to reply to that posting with just a brief comment on the video. Doesn't have to be anything long, a quick sentence, just letting me know that you watched the video and that and obviously you were here. And finally, as you know, this is week 6, and we do invite you all to let your voice be heard. I will post the link again in the announcements so that you can go there and give feedback on your experience with this course. You have the login information if you need any assistance with that. There also will be a forgotten password link there. But besides that, it's been a pleasure working with you all these past 6 weeks. If you have any questions, I will be here. And besides that, have a great night.